All right, so now we get to talk to my buddy, your friend, and mine, Captain Dean Thomas. And what we're doing here, Dean, as you well know, everybody knows everybody here. We're all friends, but it's always kind of cool to you become friends with somebody, and you're like, he's got an interesting story, yeah, or how did he get to where he is? And as we're talking, you're in Aransas Pass, and you've got some great looking fish behind you mounted. You've got some great looking antlers there from your hunting days, and people know you as that. But you know, I always give you a hard time. I love your accent. I love your Texas accent, and the way you kind of talk, and your approach to life and everything. But you're a city boy. I mean, you're a city boy. People might not know that.
My roots are in H-Town, 100%.
How about that? What was the story there?
Yeah, I went to Sam Houston High School, grew up off of 45 in Little York Airline, North Side for life.
You got to throw up the North Side sound.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess, that once whatever's in your roots, wherever you come from, you're never going to shake that. I mean, you just can't. And the North Side of Houston was, back in the days when I was growing up there, it was a great place to grow up, man. Running those streets back in the day, when things were a lot safer, the streets of H-Town now are not what they were in 1980 or 70s, late 70s and stuff. But grew up on the mean streets of the North Side of Houston, Texas. Loved it. And I lived there until I was 34 years old is when I moved to Aransas Pass.
But you've got obviously you outdoors is in your blood. Where do you come by that honestly from dad and mom or grandma?
Absolutely, man. From 3 years old, we were fishing in Chocolate Bayou. We had a little cabin right on the bayou. It was a little cabin with a boat slip right in front of it. So you pulled the boat, you put it on the lift, you stepped on the pier, you walked in the cabin, and I spent all of my younger years. I mean, hunting and fishing. I mean, it's funny because when we're out on the boat and we talk about fishing and this and that, and I say, well, it's a good thing that I can do this because it's I'm not good for anything else. That's all I've ever done. But hunting with my dad as a child, as a youngster, fishing. And then when I was old enough, at 16 years old, when my first driver's license, me and my buddies would drive to the Davy Crockett National Forest up in East Texas, and we'd go hunting. We drove to the bay. We fished around Parker's Cut in Freeport. We used to camp over there every weekend. And then I bought the first major purchase that I ever made in my life at 18 years old was a fish camp in Matagorda. I was working.
You bought that yourself. You've talked about it, but I didn't know you purchased that.
I was 18 years old. I was working for, and a lot of people have goals and aspirations in life. Go to college, have a career and such as that. I just it worked for me. I don't advise it to everybody else. I just kind of drifted through life. I mean, I ponder that nowadays, on how that all happened, why it happened. When I was growing up, I had the kind of parents that were, when you're 18 years old, there's the door. You're going to find your way through life. I mean, my dad taught me some pretty good lessons, and I knew there was a place called college. I knew I wasn't going to it. Through high school, so my dad was a truck driver. He was a Teamster truck driver. So I ended up working at Yellow Freight. I worked at Motor Freight. I worked on the docks. I was working as a roofer. I was just kind of working my way through life. I ended up in the oil field, which turned out to be a really good job. I mean, I spent many years working for a drilling tool company. I went into the field and all that. But so at 18 years old, I was working with other jobs as a roofer. And one of the guys houses that we were roofing, we just started a conversation, and we started talking about fishing and such as that. And he's like, I got this camp in Matagorda I want to sell. I was like, no way, tell me more. And yeah, I mean, I spent more on that fishing camp than any car I owned at that time. It was the first major purchase in my life. And I owned that fish camp on the end of St. Mary's Street. It was a little trailer house at the end of the road with a floating pier. It had a boat barn. My boat sat there. Well, I guess I had a boat before that, so maybe my second major purchase. But yeah,
and you probably thought it was the Taj Mahal, man.
Man, I've never been happier in my life. Back then, you know, both my boys were raised up on that pier, fishing, kids, family life. We spent, and so during that era, I was working in the oil fields, and so you worked 2 weeks, or you had every other weekend off. So you worked 2 weeks, you had a weekend off, 2 weeks on, a week off. And so as soon as we hit the road, as soon as I got off of work, man, it was packed. And every weekend we were at fish camp in Matagorda, and did that from until when I was 34 years old, and I got relocated from the job that I had in Houston. Opening was in Corpus Christi. And that is when I moved to Aransas Pass. I worked for 5 more years in the oil field, and that is when I quit that job and took a chance and started my guide business. And it was crazy because my parents, my family, everybody was like, well, you did what? You did what? You quit your job. They were like, you can still get your job back, right? That's not a done deal. And I said, well, we're going to see how this guiding thing works out. And I said, the worst thing that could happen is I go back to work. And I've managed to avoid that for 23 years now.
I need to learn your secret on that. What was Dad like? What was Dad like? Why was that such an influence?
My dad is old school, tough dude, you know, truck driver. I mean, he was the one that told you, like, if I wanted to go down the street and get in a fight and come home beat up and crying to him, he's like, don't cry to me, boy. I mean, that was the way I was raised. And it was, you know, you're going to find your way through life. You're not going to be there. I mean, literally, it sounds tough, but it was probably one of the best lessons I ever learned in life when he said, when you're 18 years old, there's the door. You know,
dude, you were a kid.
Man,
you were a kid.
It seems that way, but I was, and if you want to go back before that, I was a horrible child. I really was.
Go on.
In school, as a child, when I was in the classroom, when the teacher left the classroom, I was the child that was taken out of the classroom and sat in the hallway on a chair outside the principal's office because I could not be left alone, unsupervised. I would destroy the classroom. I would disrupt everything. And people ask me, it's like, why? Yeah. Why were you like that? And with me, I mean, if I could make the girls laugh, that was my goal back then.
That was victory.
I was the entertainer in the classroom. But yeah, man, I mean, I was a problem child. And it took me a long time to realize that. But when I got to about 30 years old, then I went to my mother and I was like, I'm sorry. I did not realize it then. I must apologize for all of those things that I did. But I mean, life is an interesting journey, man. Life is a trip. When you get to be, I mean, I'm coming up on 60 years old, and you get to reflect. You start to ponder a little bit about life in general. I wouldn't trade any of it. I mean, I honestly would not trade a minute. It was a hell of a road, a lot of bumps along the way, but enjoyed every minute of it. When I was working, one of the driving factors that made me want to be a fishing guide and want to live the outdoors lifestyle, all I wanted to do was fish and hunt. If I was at work, that's all I thought about was fishing and hunting. My worst nightmare was thinking that I'm going to live my life behind a grinder on a drilling rig, and then I was going to grow old and miss out on it.
Yeah.
I just could not do it. So, and there's sacrifices, trust me. There's Fishing guides don't have a 401k. We don't have an insurance plan. We don't have security that comes with long-term goals.
Yeah.
It's a lot of short-term goals. And then you deal with the weather, you deal with bad years, you deal with missing work, you deal with paying the bills. And so there's pros and cons to it. But living the outdoor lifestyle, the things that I have seen, the places that I've traveled, the fish that I've caught, the animals that I have hunted, the days that I've got to spend staring at that water or sitting in a tree, watching the birds, watching the animals, I wouldn't trade 1 minute of that for anything else that I've done in my life.
For a 401k. So
well,
maybe that. So here's the other thing, and that's actually really, really bold, because I am cut from the same cloth as you. Like my entire life, and this isn't about me, but so I'm getting somewhere with this, has been, how do I get outside? More so fishing than anything. How do I get outside? I got to be out there. I didn't have the guts to do it. You had 2 little ones.
Yes, my children were in elementary school when I took that leap. It was a leap.
Mm-hmm.
And that is why whenever I hear guides now or new people that come in there and they tell me that they're going to be a guide, I didn't understand the challenges that I was going to face for the first 5 years. And back then there was no Facebook, there was no Instagram, there was none of this. It was magazines, and there were ways to market yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a whole nother story that we could discuss.
You were writing articles, you were taking pictures,
taking photographs, meeting people that were writing. And better than writing stories was getting people to write stories about you. And of course, kayaking was, not to ring my own bell too much, but I am a legit pioneer in the kayak fishing world. Before anybody knew about kayak fishing, we were out there doing it. And then it came on the scene. And because of that, that's why people wanted to write stories about me. That's why people wanted to know me. They wanted to get those pictures in the magazines. It was cutting edge fishing adventure. And that, coincidentally, it was timing, it was luck. There is you can't really plan for a lot of those things, and the timing and the luck of being kayak fishing when it was exploding on the scene and getting exposure from that was a huge part of my success. The early years, starting out my business, raising kids, trying to feed kids, trying to pay bills, it was rough, but I was so determined to make this work. I was not going to give up.
What's the worst year or worst months that you've had?
As in what?
As a guide, like when you were really rubbing 2 nickels together.
Oh man, that was the first 5 years. Yeah. And so that's what I tell people. It's like, I'm going to be a fishing guide. I said, well, you better have 5 years of money in the bank to pay the bills, because you're not going to cover that boat. You're not going to cover what it costs for insurance, for guide license, for everything that it costs to run a business. And then another thing that people don't really think about, okay, you're a fishing guide. Okay, you're a business owner as well. You have record keeping, you have accounting, you have taxes, you have, those are skills that aren't easy. And I have always done 100% of the book work behind the scenes that goes with running a business.
Yeah.
There is another aspect of guiding that is running your own business.
Yeah.
And yes, you if you don't do good accounting, if you don't do good record keeping, you will regret it at the end of the year, because as a small business, you have write-offs, you have expenses, and you have to keep very good records to prove that at the end of the year. You hand that to the CPA. The CPA has to interpret that into, well, boy, you fixing to write me a check if you don't do it that way. So there's a lot of aspects to guiding and running a business. And if you're a part-time guy and you're just running weekend trips and such as that, it's not that critical. But if you're providing for your family, if you are working as that for your sole source of income, you better treat it like a business.
So when you're doing you're out in the oil fields, I mean, that's work. Like that's real work. I mean, that's hard work. Were you saving with this in mind the whole time?
Man, back then there wasn't enough to save. I mean, I was still raising kids. I was still doing, the best you could. There never was an abundance. I mean, there never was a trust fund for me. There never was a backup plan. It was like, we're going to eat some beans through the winter because we got to make it to spring break till this thing cranks up again. And then that's the way it starts. I mean, in the beginning, you have to make up what it costs to buy a boat. 20 years down the road, you've accumulated equity in boats. And then when that boat goes back, you get another boat and you're not out the amount of money that it takes to buy that first boat.
Turn them over a little bit.
And then you have all this fishing gear that you've accumulated over 10 or 15 years that you don't have to purchase every year. And then you roll from year to year with less expenses, with less worries, with less concern for what you're about to spend. And then it becomes profitable. That's the long-term goal there. You accumulate all this stuff that rolls into next year where you're not forking out so much money. Then you start putting some money in the bank. Then you start making headway. Then you start seeing a light at the end of the tunnel.
What kind of pushback did you get in your house from your significant other? Or did you? Did you get support?
Well,
did you get pushback? What was it?
Well, I mean, we can say I got divorced.
I was going to get to that. Okay, so that answers that question. Anywho, we'll get to the next one.
I can't be cold-blooded about that. My ex-wife was a huge part of the business because I had the kayak rental business, I had the guide business, and I had a small retail store, which was my shop. She ran the business, she ran the internal stuff, and I did all the fishing trips, I did all the labor, all the hauling, and the divorce was absolutely a side note to all of that. Nothing to do with that. But no, she was an integral part of my success in the early years. I cannot discredit her. And, to this day, we have no ill feelings towards each other. We've both become happy in our second lives, and that is all great.
What about tournaments? Was that part of the plan all along, or was it sort of a necessity to get your name?
And tournaments were a byproduct of that.
Mm-hmm.
Tournaments cost money.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't care how, well, I mean, I guess if you take and you go on the tournament scene and you make it 100% of your effort and you spend the entire year fishing tournaments, then you could possibly make your investment back. Tournament fishermen are bankrolled in a lot of sponsorship roles and other ways as that. I mean, it's an expensive prospect. So the tournament fishing that we did when I was traveling with Scott and doing a lot of those other things, it was for fun. That was a side note. It was an adventure. It's like, let's go on a trip. Let's travel to some cool exotic place and fish there. You were basically taking 2 weeks off of work to fish a tournament.
Yeah.
So it was a byproduct, but it was also a great marketing.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Effort. It helped expose you to a lot of different markets. And if you did go there and you win or placed, you could wave that trophy around. It adds credibility to your game. And it was, I mean, the tournament fishing had a place in the marketing scheme of advancing the business.
Yeah. Now you've portrayed yourself, and we've talked, off air, you and I just shooting the bull, so to speak, about, problem child, wasn't good in school, And I know
No,
other things.
here's a weird thing about school.
Yeah.
Straight A's,
Oh,
100%.
really?
I was valedictorian of my elementary school. I won the spelling bee.
Mm-hmm.
The behavioral problems,
It's a different
the
story.
so on my report cards with straight A's, conduct, this boy has a problem. I mean, it wasn't just a grade. There was a sentence down there that went with it.
But that's where I
So
was going. Go ahead.
no, so I mean it's kind of a contradiction there
Yeah,
that
you
the
think?
fact that I still, but in school, in class, I was absolutely, it was a challenge to me to be the first one finished with my test and make the best grade and then turn around and entertain the class.
Okay, so that's where I was going with this. So you say all that, and you were a fast car adventurer, even away from the water or hunting. I mean, you've told some stories. I mean, you wanted to live. You were kind of an early version of Caleb for a while there, weren't you?
We I mean, the stories, I could go on forever, the things we did. If anybody's familiar with the north side of Houston and Rankin Road and
Oh, I was
street
going to say
racing,
that. Yeah.
we had trucks. I had a 67 Camaro, a 69 Camaro, and of course, the first thing we did was pull the engine out of them, board them, stroked them, cam, headers, carburetors, and yes, a lot of street racing on I got arrested on the starting line of Rankin Road. And check out, guess what the charge was? Driving without headlights when required. So we're sitting on the starting line. I had the parking lights on my truck. Here comes the cops. They come in for the big raid, the sheriff's department. Cops pull up, woo, woo, get out of the truck. Boom, handcuffs. You're under arrest. I'm like, for what? Driving without headlights. And I was like, can you arrest me for that? Shoved me in a car, towed my truck somewhere, stuffed me in a police car with like 15 other people stacked in there.
Yeah.
And we went to the Humble Police Department, called my dad. Everybody's handcuffed to the bench. And yes, went to jail for driving without headlights when required. Was the actual time.
I've heard that story, and it's awesome because they had to come up with something. They knew you were going to race. They had to come up with something.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Everybody else was driving away, and I'm standing there in handcuffs, and they're hooking my truck up to the wrecker. And everybody else had their headlights on, is just going home.
But so where I was going with that is like the younger you and the you that we all know here on the podcast, completely different dude. Like you've said, you reflected and all that. What was it? Like what made you, because you're laid back. I mean, I know we all go on rants and stuff on the podcast and you'll speak your mind, but you're a laid back dude that sort of, has changed completely.
I guess you live and learn. I mean, you beat your head against the wall for long enough. And I mean, lucky enough for me, I survived that. I made it through that. And I came to the realization that you're just not gonna make it at this pace of where you're headed. And then as my two boys, as they grew up, that's really when I shifted gears. So during those younger years was totally nuts, out of control. As my boys grew up, another one that a lot of people might not know about me is I was the scoutmaster for the Boy Scouts troop for almost 15 years here in Aransas Pass. Mentored many young men. And at that point, whenever I wanted to set a much better example for my boys and kind of show them the way to be respectful and the way you live your life. And I'm very proud of my boys. They have their wild side. Trust me, my boys, they following in their daddy's footsteps pretty well, but they're both pretty responsible. But yeah, I think whenever my kids got to be impressionable, 8, 9, 10 years old, it was time for daddy to change his ways. And that's really kind of where it all shifted. I still had some. I
had your moments.
I had some regressions along the way. But yeah, my boys growing up, it really changed my outlook on life. more
Yeah.
than anything. Yeah.
Okay, this is a tough one because I trying to answer the question myself in my head. I can't. I come up with 10 or 12 answers. What's the best day ever on the water? Not necessarily fish. If I said, "What's your best day ever on the water?"
Like the most satisfying moment of just
Just
being
the one that
there
comes to mind. The one that comes to mind.
in on God's green earth.
Yeah,
Man, there
I know.
have been a lot.
But you're thinking of
Um,
something right now.
there's a couple of them that have drifted through my mind just like that.
Hmm.
A lot of the days in the kayak paddling solo, when you get out there and just and I did that for many years. The thing that I used to try to express to people when they were like, kayak fishing, man, kayak, why do you do that? I was like, man, when you're sitting in that kayak and you're gliding over the water and there's nothing but the sound of that paddle hitting the water and the water flowing over your boat, and you're looking down at that beautiful seagrass flowing under you, and the birds are flying overhead, and it's just nothing but you and the birds and the fish and Jesus out there. Um, it is those were the days when I sat back, and that was when I told myself, this is why I do this, for these moments when I'm here. The people that I meet whenever we're out there on the boat, the conversations, just the atmosphere that we enjoy, man, it would be impossible to pick one day out of those. But paddling in Florida, fishing in Florida, fishing in the Carolinas, I got one of my best friends in the world, Michael Ortiz. He was in San Antonio, met him here, we fished together. He moved out to Virginia. I've gone out there and fished with him, and we have spent some of the most amazing days, pondering the meaning of life. And those times whenever you're away from civilization and you're just out there, I've even said this lately, man, through all of the family matters and the struggles that currently going through, to get on the boat and pull away from that dock, you put everything in the background for a short time. I mean, even if it's just a couple hours, you put all of your problems somewhere else and you go out there and fish and float.
Yeah. Now you've mentioned you've mentioned the people is something that you really really like when in your profession. But what's your favorite moment of a given day when you're out on the water with clients?
When I'm pushing away from that dock and I go around that corner and I see that sunrise, and I know that I have the rest of the day to just look for fish, to go from place to place. And I mean, the thing about being the captain on the boat, and I've been on the front seat, I've been in the chair with other guides, and you're kind of at the mercy of this dude. And there's an unknown when you're in the front chair. Whenever I'm pulling out of the dock and I know I'm driving the boat and I know I get to make all the decisions and I'm going to figure this out, that challenge of leaving the dock and having these people that I have to get them on a fish, I just love the feeling when I'm leaving the dock. It's just a good day.
Yeah. Last thing, and we'll let you go here. What would you say about the people who have made this podcast, and that's the listeners, and that experience and relationship, and what it's done for you, and maybe what it's done for you moving forward with your plans?
Man, the listeners, the people I've met, the friends, I just the most the best fringe benefit of my job is the people I meet. The most interesting characters, friends, stories, hunting, fishing that we talk about all day long when we're on the boat. It is just one of the most fortunate aspects of guiding and meeting people and being out there. Everybody's in a good mood. Nobody shows up for a fishing trip in a bad mood. Nobody pulls away from that dock and going, man, I got problems to deal with. It's like all of that goes away. So, and the listeners for the podcast, how many I have met in the last few years, from the Feed and Frenzy events to the fishing trips to the interaction on the Facebook page. It's just as good as it gets, man. The people are amazing.
It is. Well, that's Captain Dean Thomas, man. And, just on a personal level, obviously, when we got you on a few times, I said, yeah, we're going to get him on regularly. So appreciate that, my man.
Enjoy every minute of it. I look forward to the time that I come and sit down in this chair, and then we just get to talk about whatever comes up for that day. I love that hour. It's my favorite hour of the week.
That's what I've always said. My favorite hour of the week. All right, you guys. That's the three captains. As you got to know them just a little bit better. Appreciate you guys joining us here on the podcast, and of course, don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and join the Facebook group page, and go fishing with all three of these fellas. Appreciate it. Have a very, very happy New Year. Be safe. We will see you out on the water, and we will talk to you next time.